The rope bucket hit the water with a splash that echoed through the silent darkness, and Grace Calloway held her breath as she worked the pulley with trembling hands. She had waited until well past midnight to make this desperate journey to the well on Ethan Quinn's property, knowing full well that stealing water from a rancher in Wyoming Territory in 1878 was the kind of offense that could get a person shot. But her younger brother Samuel lay fevered and burning in their small cabin 3 miles away, and their own well had run dry 2 days ago under the relentless summer heat that had turned South Pass City into a dust bowl. The moon hung like a silver coin behind thin clouds, offering just enough light to see the outline of the well and the dark sprawl of the Quinn ranch house beyond. Grace's heart hammered against her ribs as she hauled the bucket upward, the rope cutting into her palms even through her worn calves. She had filled 2 buckets already and positioned them carefully on the ground beside her feet. Just one more, she told herself. One more and she could make the water last another 2 days if she was careful. "You have got any idea what time it is?" The voice came from directly behind her, deep and rough with sleep, and Grace let out a startled cry that she immediately stifled with her hand. The bucket she had been raising fell back into the well with a tremendous splash. She spun around to find a tall figure silhouetted against the faint glow from the ranch house, and as her eyes adjusted, she could make out the unmistakable shape of a man in nothing but his trousers and boots, suspenders hanging loose at his sides. "I am sorry," Grace stammered, backing up until her spine pressed against the stone rim of the well. "I know I should not be here. My brother is sick and our well dried up and I just needed come back in daylight instead," the man interrupted, his tone firm but not unkind. He took a step closer and Grace could see him better now. He was perhaps 25 years old with dark hair that fell across his forehead and a strong jaw shadowed with stubble. "You come sneaking around in the dark like this, you are liable to get shot. Half the ranchers around here sleep with their rifles loaded." "I know," Grace whispered, shame flooding through her. "I just thought if no one saw me, I would not be taking charity. I was going to leave payment." She fumbled in her pocket and pulled out 3 silver coins, all the money she had left in the world. The man stepped forward and she could see his face clearly now in the moonlight. His eyes were a startling pale blue, almost gray, and they studied her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Put your money away," he said quietly. "If you needed water, you should have just asked. I am Ethan Quinn. This is my ranch." Grace's humiliation deepened. She had heard of Ethan Quinn, of course. Everyone in South Pass City knew about the young rancher who had built his spread from nothing after the war, who ran cattle across 5,000 acres and employed a dozen men. He was exactly the kind of successful, respectable man who should not be finding her stealing from his well in the middle of the night. "I am Grace Calloway," she managed. "I live with my brother Samuel about 3 miles south. We have a small homestead, or we are trying to. The drought has been hard." Ethan moved closer still, and Grace found herself looking up at him. He was tall, probably 6 feet, with broad shoulders and the lean, muscular build of a man who worked with his hands. His chest was bare and she could see old scars crossing his ribs, probably from the war that had ended more than a decade ago. "How old is your brother?" Ethan asked. 15, Grace replied. "He has had a fever for 3 days. I have been trying to keep him cool but without water. You have got medicine." "Some willow bark tea. That is all we have." Ethan was quiet for a moment, then he bent down and picked up the 2 buckets Grace had already filled. "I will help you carry these to your wagon." "I do not have a wagon," Grace admitted. "I walked." He stared at her. "You walked 3 miles in the dark to steal water." "I did not think of it as stealing," Grace said defensively. I was going to pay, and you were planning to walk 3 miles back carrying these buckets." When he put it like that, it did sound foolish. Grace lifted her chin. "I would have managed." Something that might have been respect flickered across Ethan's face. "Wait here," he said. He set the buckets down and strode toward the barn, moving with the easy confidence of a man on his own land. Grace stood by the well, uncertain whether she should run or stay. Part of her wanted to flee into the darkness, but she needed that water desperately, and Ethan Quinn had not shot her or even threatened her. He had simply told her to come back in daylight instead. He returned a few minutes later leading a sorrel mare already saddled. He had put on a shirt but left it unbuttoned, and Grace tried not to notice the way it fell open across his chest. He tied the buckets securely to the saddle, then turned to her. "You can ride?" he asked. "Yes, but good." "Take Rosie here and get that water back to your brother. Bring her back tomorrow." He paused. "In daylight." Grace felt tears prick at her eyes, unexpected and unwelcome. "Why are you helping me?" Ethan's expression softened slightly. "Because I know what it is like to have nothing and no one to turn to. And because I would rather you not get yourself killed walking home in the dark. There are wolves out there, not to mention worse things on 2 legs." He helped her mount, his hands strong and steady on her waist as he lifted her into the saddle. The brief contact sent an unexpected warmth through Grace's body that had nothing to do with the summer heat. She settled herself and took the reins, looking down at Ethan Quinn with genuine gratitude. "Thank you," she said softly. "Truly, I will bring Rosie back tomorrow and I will find some way to repay you." "Just take care of your brother," Ethan replied. "And Grace, next time you need something, ask. I am not the kind of man who turns away neighbors in trouble." Grace nodded, not trusting her voice, and urged the mare into a gentle walk. She looked back once and saw Ethan still standing by the well, watching her disappear into the darkness. Something had shifted in that brief encounter, something she could not quite name but felt all the way through her bones. The ride back to the homestead passed quickly, with Rosie's steady gait carrying her through the night. The small cabin she shared with Samuel came into view as the first gray hints of dawn touched the eastern sky. Grace dismounted and tied Rosie to the porch rail, then carried the precious buckets inside. Samuel lay on his cot exactly as she had left him, his face flushed with fever and his breathing shallow. Grace dampened a cloth with the cool well water and pressed it to his forehead, murmuring soothing words. His eyes fluttered open and he looked at her with confusion. "Gracie," he whispered. "Where did you get the water?" "From a neighbor," she replied, which was not quite a lie. "Drink some. You need to stay hydrated." She helped him sit up and held a cup to his lips. He drank greedily, then fell back against his thin pillow with a sigh. Grace spent the rest of the morning tending to him, changing his cool compresses and getting him to drink as much water as he could manage. By afternoon, his fever had broken slightly and he was sleeping peacefully. Grace looked at herself in the small, cracked mirror that hung over the wash basin and winced. Her dark blonde hair had escaped its braid and hung in tangles around her face. Her dress was stained with dust and sweat, and there were dark circles under her green eyes. She was 22 years old but felt ancient, worn down by the constant struggle to survive on their failing homestead. Still, she had promised to return Ethan Quinn's horse, and Grace Calloway kept her promises. She braided her hair neatly, put on her only other dress which was slightly less worn, and wrote a quick note for Samuel, in case he woke while she was gone. Then she mounted Rosie and began the journey back to the Quinn ranch. The landscape looked entirely different in daylight. What had seemed mysterious and threatening in darkness was revealed as rolling grassland dotted with cattle, and the occasional stand of cottonwoods marking a creek bed. The Quinn ranch house came into view as she crested a low hill, and Grace caught her breath at the sight. It was a substantial two-story structure built of golden timber with a wide porch wrapping around the front and side. Corrals and outbuildings spread out behind it, and she could see men working with horses in the distance. This was not just a ranch, it was an empire, and Ethan Quinn had built it himself. She rode into the yard and dismounted, leading Rosie toward the barn. A weathered man with gray hair and a pronounced limp emerged from the shadows. "Can I help you, miss?" he asked, his tone polite but wary. "I am returning Mr. Quinn's horse," Grace explained. "He was kind enough to lend her to me last night." The man's eyebrows rose, but he took Rosie's reins without comment. "I will see she is tended to. Mr. Quinn is up at the house if you want to thank him proper." Grace hesitated, suddenly nervous at the thought of facing Ethan Quinn in full daylight, but she could not just leave without a word, not after his generosity. She climbed the porch steps and knocked on the heavy wooden door. It swung open almost immediately, and Ethan stood there, now fully dressed in work clothes with his dark hair still damp as if he had recently washed. His eyes widened slightly when he saw her. "Miss Calloway," he said, "I did not expect you until this evening. How is your brother?" "Better," Grace replied. "The fever broke this morning. I cannot thank you enough for your kindness last night. You already did. But since you are here, would you like some coffee? I was just about to have some lunch, and I would welcome the company." Grace knew she should decline. It was not proper for an unmarried woman to be alone with a bachelor in his home. But the smell of fresh coffee drifting from inside was intoxicating, and she found herself nodding before she could think better of it. "Just for a few minutes," she said. "I should get back to Samuel." Ethan led her into a large kitchen with a massive wood stove and a sturdy table that could seat a dozen men. He poured her coffee in a tin cup and set out bread, cheese, and cold beef. Grace's stomach growled audibly and she blushed. "When did you last eat?" Ethan asked quietly. "Yesterday morning," Grace admitted. "We have been low on supplies." He pushed the plate toward her. "Eat." They sat in companionable silence while Grace devoured the simple meal. She had not realized how hungry she was until food was in front of her. Ethan watched her with those pale blue eyes, and she found herself meeting his gaze more than once. "Tell me about your homestead," he said finally. "You said you are trying to make it work." Grace set down her coffee cup and nodded. "My father claimed the land 5 years ago. He had dreams of farming, of building something for Samuel and me. But he got sick 2 winters past and died before spring. Samuel and I have been trying to hold on to the place, but it has been difficult. We lost most of our crops to the drought this summer and our well is dry." "What about other family? Your mother?" "She died when Samuel was born. It has just been the 3 of us for a long time, and now it is just Samuel and me." Ethan leaned back in his chair, studying her. 15-year-old boy and a woman alone. That is dangerous country you are trying to work." "I can handle a rifle," Grace said defensively. "And Samuel is strong for his age. We manage." "I am not doubting your courage," Ethan said gently. "But courage does not dig a new well or plant crops when the land is too dry to sustain them. Have you thought about selling the homestead?" Grace's jaw tightened. "And go where? Do what? That land is all Samuel and I have left of our father. I will not give up on his dream." Something shifted in Ethan's expression, a recognition perhaps, or understanding. "I felt the same way about this place when I started," he said. "My father died at Shiloh, left me nothing but his name and a lot of debt. I worked cattle drives for 3 years, saved every penny and bought this land when I was 20. Everybody said I was crazy, that I would never make it, but here I am." "Then you understand why I cannot just walk away," Grace said. "I do, but I also understand the reality of this country. You need help, Grace. You cannot do it alone. I am not alone, I have Samuel, a 15-year-old boy who is currently sick with fever. What happens next time you need something and he is not there to help? What happens when winter comes and you have no crops, no money, and a dry well? Grace stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the wooden floor. I should go. Thank you for the meal and for the loan of your horse. Ethan rose as well, moving around the table to stand in front of her. He was so tall that she had to tilt her head back to look at him, and the intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. I am not trying to insult you, he said quietly. I am trying to help. Let me send some of my men over to look at your well. Maybe it can be salvaged, and I can spare some supplies until you get back on your feet. I cannot accept charity, Grace said stubbornly. Then do not think of it as charity. Think of it as neighbors helping neighbors. That is how people survive out here. Grace wanted to refuse, wanted to cling to her pride and walk out of Ethan Quinn's house with her head held high. But she thought of Samuel lying fevered in their cabin, of their empty pantry and dry well, of the long winter ahead. Pride would not keep them alive. All right, she said finally, the words tasting like defeat. But I will find a way to repay you, I promise. Ethan smiled, and it transformed his entire face, making him look younger and somehow more approachable. I will hold you to that. Now, I am going to load some supplies into a wagon and drive you home. No arguments. Grace opened her mouth to protest, then closed it again. She was too tired to fight anymore, and the thought of not having to walk 3 miles in the afternoon heat was too appealing to resist. True to his word, Ethan loaded a wagon with sacks of flour, beans, and cornmeal, along with salt pork, coffee, and sugar. He added a large barrel filled with water from his well, and tied everything down securely. Then he helped Grace up onto the wagon seat and climbed up beside her. The ride to the Calloway homestead gave them time to talk, and Grace found herself relaxing in Ethan's presence. He asked about her life before coming to Wyoming, and she told him about growing up in Missouri, about her father's restless dreams of the West, about the long journey on the wagon train when she was just 15 years old. In turn, Ethan spoke about his own childhood in Illinois, about losing his father and 2 brothers to the war, about his mother's death from grief shortly after. His voice held old pain but also strength, the kind that came from surviving the unsurvivable. We are both orphans then, Grace said softly as the small Calloway cabin came into view. I suppose we are, Ethan agreed, but we are still here. That counts for something. He pulled the wagon up in front of the cabin and Samuel appeared in the doorway, looking much better than when Grace had left him. His eyes widened when he saw Ethan unloading supplies. Gracie, what is all this? He asked, his young voice cracking with confusion. This is Ethan Quinn, our neighbor, Grace explained. He has been kind enough to help us out. Samuel looked between them with the sharp intelligence of a boy forced to grow up too fast. We cannot afford, you are not paying for anything, Ethan interrupted firmly. Your sister and I came to an arrangement. She is going to repay me with work once you are back on your feet. It was the first Grace had heard of any such arrangement, but she understood what Ethan was doing. He was giving Samuel a way to accept the help without feeling like they were taking charity. She shot Ethan a grateful look, and he gave her an almost imperceptible nod. Together, they unloaded the supplies and carried them into the cabin. Ethan looked around the small space with its dirt floor and rough-hewn furniture, and Grace felt a flash of shame at how poor they were. But Ethan's expression showed only thoughtfulness, not judgment. I will send 2 of my men over tomorrow to look at your well, he said. If it can be fixed, they will fix it. If not, we will talk about other options. Thank you, Grace said, meaning it with her whole heart. You have been incredibly kind. Ethan met her eyes and something passed between them, a connection that went beyond simple neighborly assistance. "I will see you soon, Grace Calloway," he said softly. Then he tipped his hat to Samuel and climbed back onto the wagon. Grace stood in the doorway and watched him drive away until he disappeared over the rise. Samuel came to stand beside her. "He seems like a good man," Samuel observed. "He is," Grace agreed. "And he looks at you like you are the most interesting thing he has ever seen." Grace felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Do not be ridiculous." But that night, as she lay on her cot staring at the ceiling, she could not stop thinking about Ethan Quinn's pale blue eyes and the way he had smiled at her. She told herself it meant nothing, that he was just being neighborly, that a successful rancher like Ethan Quinn would never be interested in a poor homesteader's daughter. Still, when she finally fell asleep, she dreamed of strong hands lifting her onto a horse and a deep voice telling her to come back in daylight instead. True to his word, Ethan sent 2 of his ranch hands the next morning. They were grizzled cowboys named Jack and Pete, who tipped their hats respectfully to Grace and got straight to work examining the well. By mid-afternoon, they had determined that the well had not actually run dry but had collapsed partway down, blocking the water flow. "We can fix it," Jack told Grace, "but it is going to take a few days of work. Need to shore up the sides and clear the blockage." "Please do whatever needs to be done," Grace said. "I will make sure Mr. Quinn knows how grateful we are." The men returned every day for a week, working from dawn until dusk. Grace made them meals and brought them water, and Samuel helped where he could, having recovered fully from his fever. On the 4th day, Ethan himself rode over to check on the progress. Grace saw him coming and felt her heart do a strange little skip in her chest. She had thought about him constantly over the past few days, replaying their conversations and the way he had looked at her. Now here he was, sitting tall in his saddle, the afternoon sun turning his dark hair almost black. "Mr. Quinn," she called out as he dismounted, "this is an unexpected pleasure." "I wanted to see how the work was progressing," Ethan said, but his eyes were on her, not the well. "And to see how you and Samuel are doing." "We are well, thanks to you. Would you like some coffee?" They sat on the porch while Jack and Pete continued working. Grace poured coffee from the pot she kept warm on the stove and settled into the chair beside Ethan. It felt natural, comfortable, as if they had been doing this for years instead of days. "I have been thinking," Ethan said after a moment, "about that work arrangement we discussed. I could use some help at the ranch. My housekeeper quit last month to go live with her daughter in Cheyenne, and I have been making do on my own. If you were interested, you could come 3 days a week to cook and clean. I would pay fair wages." Grace's first instinct was to refuse. She knew how such an arrangement would look to the people in South Pass City, an unmarried woman working alone in a bachelor's home. But they desperately needed the money, and Ethan's offer was honorable. "What about Samuel?" she asked. "Bring him along. I can always use an extra hand around the ranch, and it would be good for him to learn the cattle business, if he is interested." Grace looked at Ethan carefully, trying to read his intentions. His expression was open, sincere, with no hint of anything improper. And yet she could not shake the feeling that there was more to this offer than simple employment. "All right," she said slowly, "but people will talk. Let them talk. I know my intentions are honorable, and so do you. That is what matters." Over the following weeks, Grace fell into a routine. 3 days a week she would ride to the Quinn ranch with Samuel, and while he worked with the ranch hands learning to rope and ride, she would clean Ethan's house and prepare meals for him and his men. It was hard work but honest, and Ethan paid her generously. More than that, she found herself looking forward to those days. Ethan would often join her in the kitchen after his work was done, and they would talk while she cooked. He told her about his plans for the ranch, his dreams of expanding his herd and maybe one day raising horses as well as cattle. She shared her own hopes, carefully tended dreams of making the homestead profitable again, of giving Samuel a real future. Sometimes their conversations would stretch late into the evening, and Ethan would insist on riding home with her and Samuel to make sure they arrived safely. Those rides through the gathering dusk became Grace's favorite part of the week, with the three of them talking and laughing together like a real family. One evening in late August, after Samuel had gone ahead on his horse, Ethan reached over and took Grace's hand as they rode. She started at the contact but did not pull away, and they rode the rest of the way in comfortable silence, hands intertwined. When they reached the Calloway homestead, Ethan helped Grace dismount, his hands lingering on her waist. They stood close together in the fading light, and Grace could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "Grace," he said softly, "I need to tell you something." Her heart hammered in her chest. "What is it?" "These past weeks, getting to know you, spending time with you, it has been the best part of my days. You are smart and strong and beautiful, and I find myself thinking about you constantly. I know we have not known each other long, but I feel something when I am with you. Something I have never felt before." Grace could hardly breathe. "I feel it too," she whispered. Ethan cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing her cheekbones. "Then let me court you properly. Let me take you to the church social next week. Let everyone in South Pass City know that I am serious about you." "Yes," Grace said, not hesitating. "Yes, Ethan, I would like that very much." He smiled, that beautiful transforming smile, and then he leaned down and kissed her. It was gentle at first, almost tentative, but when Grace pressed closer, he deepened the kiss, pulling her tight against him. She felt like she was melting, like every nerve in her body had come alive. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. "I should go," Ethan said, though he made no move to release her, "before I forget myself entirely." "I will see you Sunday," Grace replied, her voice trembling with emotion. She watched him ride away and then turned to find Samuel watching from the cabin doorway with a knowing grin on his face. She blushed, but could not stop smiling. The church social was held on the first Sunday of every month in the schoolhouse, with families bringing covered dishes to share and musicians playing for dancing. Grace wore her best dress, a simple blue cotton that brought out her eyes, and let her hair hang loose in soft waves down her back. When Ethan arrived to collect her and Samuel, the look on his face made her feel like the most beautiful woman in Wyoming Territory. They arrived to find the schoolhouse already crowded with people. Grace felt the stares as she walked in on Ethan's arm, heard the whispers that followed them. Let them talk, she thought, remembering Ethan's words. She had nothing to be ashamed of. Ethan introduced her to people she had never met, successful ranchers and their wives, the banker, the owner of the general store. He was claiming her publicly, making it clear to everyone that Grace Calloway was important to him. The realization made her giddy with happiness. When the music started, Ethan led her onto the dance floor. Grace had not danced in years, not since before her father died, but Ethan was patient and skilled, guiding her through the steps until she found the rhythm. They danced 3 dances in a row, ignoring the pointed looks from some of the older matrons. Between dances, Ethan introduced her to his friends. There was Tom Morrison, who owned the ranch adjacent to Ethan's, and his wife Sarah, a kind woman close to Grace's age who immediately took her aside. "I am so glad Ethan has finally found someone," Sarah said warmly. "He has been alone too long, and you seem like a lovely person." "Thank you," Grace replied, grateful for the acceptance. "I have to admit I am a bit overwhelmed by all this. I understand. When Tom first courted me, I was terrified of being the center of attention. But Ethan is a good man, one of the best I know. If he cares for you, then you must be special indeed. The evening passed in a blur of music and laughter and food. Grace met so many people that she knew she would never remember all their names, but everyone was kind and welcoming. When it was time to leave, Ethan drove them home under a sky filled with stars. "Did you have a good time?" he asked Grace as they rode. "A wonderful time," she replied honestly. "Though I think we gave the gossips plenty to talk about." "Good. Let them know that you are spoken for." Grace felt warmth spread through her chest. "Am I spoken for?" Ethan reached over and took her hand. "If you are willing to be." "I am willing," Grace said softly. Over the next 2 months, Ethan courted Grace with the same determination he brought to everything in his life. He took her on picnics by the creek, taught her to ride better, and spent long evenings sitting on her porch talking about everything and nothing. Samuel clearly adored Ethan, and the feeling seemed mutual. Ethan taught the boy how to break a horse properly, how to read the weather, how to calculate fair prices for cattle. In October, Ethan proposed. He did it simply, without flourish, on an evening when they were sitting on his porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and gold. "Marry me, Grace," he said, turning to face her. "I love you. I think I have loved you since that first night when I found you at my well, trying so hard to be brave even though you were terrified. Marry me and let me spend the rest of my life taking care of you and Samuel." Grace felt tears streaming down her face. "I love you too," she said. "Yes, Ethan, I will marry you." He pulled a ring from his pocket, a simple gold band with a small diamond, and slipped it onto her finger. Then he kissed her until she was dizzy, until the world narrowed to just the two of them and the love that burned between them. They were married in November in the small church in South Pass City. Grace wore a dress that Sarah Morrison had helped her make, white cotton with lace at the collar and cuffs. Samuel stood up as witness, looking so proud and grown up in his new suit that Grace nearly cried. Ethan looked devastatingly handsome in his best clothes, his eyes never leaving her face as they spoke their vows. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Ethan kissed her in front of the whole congregation, a kiss that promised love and passion and a future together. Grace felt like her heart might burst with happiness. They held the reception at the ranch, with half of South Pass City in attendance. There was music and dancing and more food than Grace had seen in years. Ethan danced with her again and again, holding her close and whispering how beautiful she was, how lucky he felt, how much he loved her. That night, after all the guests had gone home and Samuel had been settled in his new room in the ranch house, Ethan carried Grace over the threshold of their bedroom. He set her down gently and looked at her with such love and desire that Grace felt heat flood through her entire body. "Are you nervous?" he asked softly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "A little," Grace admitted, "but I trust you." Ethan kissed her slowly, thoroughly, his hands gentle as he helped her out of her dress. Grace had never been with a man before, and her hands trembled as she unbuttoned his shirt. But Ethan was patient and tender, showing her with touches and kisses how much he loved her. When they finally came together, it was beautiful and right, and Grace understood for the first time what it meant to be truly one with another person. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the big bed, Ethan's arms wrapped around her. "I love you, Mrs. Quinn," he murmured against her hair. "I love you too, Mr. Quinn," Grace replied, snuggling closer. She fell asleep feeling safe and cherished, knowing that she had found her home at last. The first months of their marriage were blissful. Grace threw herself into running the household, working alongside the ranch hands' wives to prepare meals for the men and managing the household accounts. Ethan was an affectionate husband, stealing kisses when they passed in the hallway and holding her close at night. Samuel thrived under Ethan's guidance, growing stronger and more confident every day. In January, Grace discovered she was pregnant. She told Ethan one evening after supper, nervous about how he would react. His response was everything she could have hoped for. He let out a whoop of joy and picked her up, spinning her around until she was laughing and begging him to put her down. "We are going to have a baby," he kept saying, wonder in his voice. "Grace, we are going to have a baby." "We are," she confirmed, her hands resting on her still flat stomach. In late summer, the doctor thinks. Ethan dropped to his knees and pressed his face against her abdomen. "Hello in there, little one," he said softly. "This is your papa. I promise I am going to take such good care of you and your mama." Grace ran her fingers through his dark hair, overwhelmed with love for this man who had changed her entire life. When he looked up at her, there were tears in his eyes. "Thank you," he said. "Thank you for loving me, for marrying me, for giving me this family. I never thought I would have this." "Neither did I," Grace whispered. "But here we are." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the winter and into spring. Grace bloomed, her face glowing with health and happiness. Ethan fussed over her constantly, insisting she not work too hard and bringing her little gifts whenever he went into town. Samuel was excited about becoming an uncle, already planning all the things he would teach the baby. In late August, as the summer heat bore down on South Pass City, Grace went into labor. It was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day. Ethan paced outside the bedroom where Sarah Morrison and the doctor attended Grace, nearly wearing a hole in the floor. Samuel sat with him, trying to be strong though Grace's cries of pain made him pale. Finally, as the sun was setting on the second day, the thin wail of a newborn cut through the house. Ethan froze, hardly daring to breathe until Sarah opened the door with a huge smile on her face. "Come meet your son," she said. Ethan rushed into the room to find Grace propped up in bed, exhausted but glowing, cradling a tiny bundle in her arms. She looked up at him with such love that it nearly brought him to his knees. "We have a son," she said softly. "A healthy, beautiful son." Ethan sat carefully on the edge of the bed and looked down at his child for the first time. The baby had a shock of dark hair and a red, scrunched-up face, and he was the most perfect thing Ethan had ever seen. "What should we name him?" Grace asked. They had discussed names for months but had never quite decided. Now, looking at his son, Ethan knew exactly what felt right. "James," he said. "James Thomas Quinn, after my father and my best friend who died at Gettysburg." "James," Grace repeated, smiling. "I like that. Hello, James. Welcome to the world." She placed the baby in Ethan's arms and he held his son for the first time, marveling at how small and fragile he was. A fierce protectiveness welled up in him, a determination to give this child everything he himself had lacked growing up. Samuel was allowed in to meet his nephew, and his face lit up when he saw the baby. "He is so small," Samuel breathed. "Can I hold him?" Ethan showed Samuel how to support the baby's head and watched as his brother-in-law cradled little James with surprising gentleness. The tableau of his family all together, safe and healthy, was almost more happiness than Ethan could contain. Those first few months with James were exhausting but wonderful. The baby was colicky and cried often, but Ethan would walk the floor with him at night, singing old songs his mother had taught him, while Grace got some desperately needed rest. During the day, Grace would bring James out to the porch in a basket while she worked, and the ranch hands would take turns making faces at the baby to try to get him to smile. By the time James was 6 months old, He was a happy, chubby baby who smiled constantly and had clearly wrapped his father around his little finger. Ethan adored him, spending every spare moment with his son. Grace would often find them together in the evening, Ethan reading aloud from the newspaper while James babbled and waved his fists. Samuel, now 17, had become an invaluable part of the ranch operation. Ethan had made him assistant foreman, and the young man had proven himself capable and hardworking. He had also started courting Emily Chen, the daughter of the man who ran the general store in South Pass City, and Grace suspected an engagement was not far off. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. The ranch prospered under Ethan's management, the herds growing larger every year. Grace managed the household with efficiency and grace, beloved by all the ranch hands. James grew from a baby into a toddler, then into a rambunctious little boy who followed his father everywhere. When James was 3 years old, Grace discovered she was pregnant again. This time, Ethan was calmer about it, though no less delighted. The pregnancy was easier than the first, and in the spring of 1883, Grace gave birth to a daughter they named Alina Rose. Alina had her mother's green eyes and her father's dark hair, and she was a peaceful baby who rarely cried. James was fascinated by his little sister, constantly wanting to help take care of her. Ethan declared her the most beautiful baby girl ever born, and Grace teased him about being hopelessly biased. One evening when Alina was about 6 months old, the family sat together on the porch watching the sunset. James played with his wooden horses in the corner while Ethan held Alina and Grace leaned against his shoulder. "You ever think about that first night?" Grace asked softly. "When you found me at your well," Ethan smiled, pressing a kiss to her hair. "All the time. Best night of my life, even though I did not know it then." "I was so scared," Grace remembered. "I thought you were going to shoot me. I could never have done that." "Even then, there was something about you. You were so fierce, so determined to take care of your brother. I admired that." "You told me to come back in daylight instead," Grace said. "Best advice anyone ever gave me." "Look at us now," Ethan said, his arm tightening around her. "A family, a home, a life together. Sometimes I have to pinch myself to believe it is all real." Grace turned to kiss him properly. "It is real. This is our life, the one we built together." Samuel rode up just then with Emily beside him. They had been married the previous year in a lovely ceremony, and Emily had fit seamlessly into their family. Samuel dismounted and helped his wife down, his face glowing with excitement. "We have news," Samuel announced. "Emily is expecting. We are going to have a baby." Grace jumped up with a delighted cry and hugged them both. Ethan shook Samuel's hand and clapped him on the back, congratulating them warmly. James wanted to know if he would get to play with the new baby, and everyone laughed at his innocent excitement. That night, after the children were asleep and Samuel and Emily had gone to their own home on the edge of the ranch property, Ethan and Grace lay together in their bed. "Our family just keeps growing," Grace said wonderingly. "I never imagined this when I was sneaking around your well in the dark, trying to survive one more day." "Neither did I," Ethan agreed. "I thought I would spend my life alone, building this ranch but never having anyone to share it with. And then you appeared, this brave, beautiful woman who changed everything." "You changed everything for me too," Grace said. "You gave me hope when I had none. You gave me love, a home, a future. You gave me everything." Ethan rolled toward her, cupping her face in his hands. "You are my heart, Grace Quinn. You and our children, I love you more than I can ever express." "Show me," Grace whispered, pulling him close. And he did, with tender touches and passionate kisses, proving with his body what words could never fully convey. The years flowed past like the waters of the creek that ran through Quinland. James grew into a tall, serious boy who loved working with the cattle and dreamed of one day running the ranch himself. Eleanor was bright and curious, constantly getting into mischief and charming her way out of trouble with her gap-toothed smile. Samuel and Emily had 3 children, 2 boys and a girl, and their family thrived on their section of the ranch. The cousins grew up together, running wild across the grasslands and learning the ways of ranching from Ethan and Samuel. South Pass City grew as well, evolving from a rough frontier town into a proper community with a new school, a library, and even a small hospital. Grace became involved in civic activities, helping to organize charity drives and serving on the school board. Ethan was elected to the town council and worked to bring a railroad spur to South Pass City, knowing it would help all the ranchers get their cattle to market more easily. In 1890, when James was 11 and Eleanor was 7, Ethan decided to expand the ranch operation into horse breeding. He bought a magnificent black stallion and several quality mares and began building a breeding program. James threw himself into the project with enthusiasm, spending hours in the stables learning everything he could about horses. Grace found herself pregnant again that year, a surprise given that she was now 34 years old. But the pregnancy progressed normally, and in early 1891 she gave birth to another son. They named him Daniel Samuel, after Ethan's brother who had died at Antietam and Grace's beloved younger brother. Daniel was a sweet-natured baby who seemed content just to observe the chaos of family life swirling around him. James and Eleanor doted on their baby brother, taking turns helping to care for him. Ethan joked that they were raising their own ranch crew. The ranch continued to prosper. By the mid-1890s, the Quinn Ranch was one of the largest and most successful operations in Wyoming. Ethan employed over 30 men and ran more than 10,000 head of cattle across his land. The horse breeding program had also proven successful, with Quinn horses gaining a reputation for intelligence and endurance. Despite their success and wealth, Ethan and Grace never forgot where they had come from. They quietly helped struggling homesteaders, offering loans that did not need to be repaid and jobs for those who needed work. Grace made sure that no one in South Pass City went hungry if she could help it, organizing food drives and personally delivering supplies to families in need. "You have a soft heart, Mrs. Quinn," Ethan told her one evening after she returned from delivering a wagon load of supplies to a widow with 6 children. "I remember what it was like to have nothing," Grace replied, "to be desperate and afraid and not know where help would come from. I never want anyone to feel that way if I can prevent it." Ethan pulled her into his arms. "This is why I love you. You have never let success make you hard or forgetful. You still see the people, not just the circumstances." As the 19th century drew to a close, the Quinn children were growing up. James was nearly 20, a man now, tall and broad-shouldered like his father with his mother's kind heart. He had taken on more and more responsibility at the ranch, and Ethan had begun discussing making him a full partner in the operation. Eleanor was 16, beautiful and spirited, with more marriage proposals than she knew what to do with. But she had declared that she had no intention of marrying until she was at least 20, wanting to attend the new women's college that had opened in Denver first. Daniel was 9, a quiet boy who loved reading and had announced his intention to become a doctor. Ethan and Grace fully supported his dream, already making plans to send him east for his education when the time came. Samuel's children were also growing, his oldest son now working full-time on the ranch alongside his father. Emily had become one of Grace's closest friends, and the 2 women often sat together in the evenings. sewing and talking while their husbands played cards and their children ran wild outside. One evening in the summer of 1899, Ethan and Grace escaped the chaos of the house and went for a ride together, something they had not done in years. They rode to the old Calloway homestead, which they had absorbed into the ranch property years ago but kept maintained as a sort of monument to where their story had begun. The cabin was still standing, though they did not use it anymore. The well that had once run dry now flowed freely, thanks to the work of Ethan's men all those years ago. Grace dismounted and walked over to it, peering down into the dark depths. "You remember the first time you saw me?" she asked Ethan as he came to stand beside her. "How could I forget?" "It was the middle of the night and I heard someone messing with my well. I came out expecting to find a thief or a drifter, and instead I found you, this beautiful, fierce woman who was risking everything to save her brother." "I thought you were going to shoot me," Grace said, laughing at the memory. "I thought about it," Ethan teased. "But then you looked at me with those green eyes and I was lost. I knew right then that you were going to change my life, though I did not know how yet." Grace turned to face him fully. They were both older now, with lines on their faces and silver threading through their hair. But when Ethan looked at her, Grace still felt like that young woman standing by the well in the darkness, terrified and hopeful all at once. "Come back in daylight instead," Grace quoted softly. Those were the words that changed everything. "They were," Ethan agreed, "because you did come back. You trusted me enough to come back in daylight to let me help you, to let me into your life. And I have thanked God for that every single day since." He pulled her close and kissed her, and Grace melted into his embrace just as she had that first time. After more than 20 years of marriage, 3 children, countless challenges and triumphs, she still felt that same spark when he touched her, that same certainty that this was exactly where she belonged. "I love you, Ethan Quinn," she murmured against his lips. "I love you too, Grace Quinn. Always and forever." They stood together by the well as the sun set, 2 people who had found each other in the darkness and built a life together in the light. Around them, the land they had worked so hard to tame stretched out in all directions, dotted with cattle and horses bearing the Quinn brand. In the distance, they could see the lights of South Pass City, the town that had become their home. It had been 21 years since Grace had come to Ethan's well in the dark, desperate and afraid. 21 years since he had told her to come back in daylight instead. Those simple words had set in motion a love story that had transformed both their lives, creating a family and a legacy that would endure for generations. As they rode back to the ranch house, where their children and grandnieces and grandnephews were waiting, Grace reflected on how much had changed. The scared young woman who had stolen water in the night had become a confident matriarch, respected throughout the territory. The lonely rancher had become a devoted husband and father, his house filled with laughter and love. The next few years brought their own changes and challenges. James married a sweet-natured girl named Margaret whom he had met at church, and they settled into a house on the ranch property. Within a year, they had given Ethan and Grace their first grandchild, a boy they named Ethan James after his grandfather. Eleanor did go to Denver for college, studying literature and art. She returned 2 years later with a degree and a fiancé, a young lawyer named Robert, who had been completely captivated by her intelligence and beauty. They married in a grand ceremony in South Pass City and settled in town, where Robert opened a law practice. Daniel pursued his dream of becoming a doctor, heading east to medical school when he turned 18. He wrote home regularly, his letters full of his studies and experiences. Ethan and Grace were immensely proud of him, knowing he would make a difference in many lives. Samuel and Emily's children were all doing well too. Their oldest son, Peter, had married and started his own small ranch with financial help from Ethan. The younger children were still at home, helping their parents run their section of the Quinn Ranch. In 1905, as they approached their 26th wedding anniversary, Ethan decided to throw a grand celebration. He invited everyone they knew to the ranch for a party that lasted from afternoon into the night. There was music and dancing and mountains of food. Friends and family came from all over Wyoming and beyond to celebrate with them. As the evening drew to a close and the guests began to depart, Grace and Ethan found themselves alone on their porch once more, just as they had been so many times over the years. Grace was now 49 and Ethan was 51. Their hair was more silver than dark now, and their faces bore the lines of years spent working under the Wyoming sun. But when Ethan took Grace's hand and pulled her close, she still felt that same flutter in her heart that she had felt the first time he kissed her. Some things, she realized, never changed. 26 years, Ethan said softly. 26 years since I married the woman I found stealing from my well in the dark, Grace laughed. I was not stealing, I was borrowing. Is that what we are calling it now? I was going to leave payment, Grace protested, though she was smiling. Ethan's expression turned serious. You know, I have thought about that night so many times over the years. What if I had not heard you? What if I had just shot first and asked questions later, like a lot of men would have done? We would have missed all of this. But you did not, Grace said firmly. You came out and you talked to me and you helped me. That is who you are, Ethan. That is who you have always been. A good man with a kind heart. You make me better than I am, Ethan replied. You and our children, our family, you have given my life purpose and meaning. Before you, I was just existing, building this ranch, but not really living. You taught me what it means to truly live. Grace felt tears prick at her eyes. Even after all these years, Ethan could still move her with his words. We taught each other, she said. I was so lost when my father died, so scared and alone. You gave me hope. You gave me a future. You gave me love. They stood together watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. Their grandchildren were asleep inside the house, and their own children were settled in their own homes with their own families. The ranch that Ethan had built with his own 2 hands would go on, passing to the next generation and the one after that. You have any regrets? Ethan asked quietly. Grace thought about the question seriously. Had there been hardships? Of course. The drought years, the cattle disease that wiped out a quarter of their herd in 1897, the time Alina had fallen from a horse and broken her arm, the worry when Daniel went east to school. But regrets? Not a single one, she said finally. Every moment, good and bad, led us here, led us to this life, this family. How could I regret any of it? Ethan smiled and kissed her forehead. I feel the same way. Even the hard times were worth it because we faced them together. As they prepared for bed that night, Grace caught sight of herself in the mirror. She looked at the woman she had become, so different from the desperate young homesteader who had crept to a stranger's well in the darkness all those years ago. That girl had been brave out of necessity, strong because she had no choice. This woman was brave and strong because she had chosen to be, supported by the love of a good man and the family they had built together. Ethan came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, meeting her eyes in the mirror. What are you thinking about? Just about how far we have come, Grace replied, about how much has changed. Some things never change, Ethan said, turning her to face him. I still love you just as much as I did the day I married you. More, even, because now I know all the ways you are amazing. You are still the bravest, most beautiful woman I have ever known. Grace stood on her tiptoes to kiss him. And you are still the kindest, most wonderful man. I thank God every day that I was desperate enough to sneak onto your property that night. And I thank God every day that I heard you, Ethan replied, and that I had the sense to tell you to come back in daylight instead. They made love that night with the tenderness of long familiarity, but also with passion that had never dimmed. Afterward, they lay tangled together as they had done thousands of times before, comfortable in the silence that comes from truly knowing another person. The years continued to roll past. More grandchildren were born, and eventually great-grandchildren. The ranch continued to prosper under James's management, with Ethan stepping back into more of an advisory role as he aged. Grace remained active in the community, her charitable work touching countless lives. In 1912, South Pass City held a celebration for Ethan and Grace's 33rd wedding anniversary. The whole town turned out to honor the couple who had become pillars of the community. There were speeches about their generosity and leadership, about how they had helped shape South Pass City into the thriving town it had become. When it was Ethan's turn to speak, he stood up and looked out at the assembled crowd. His hair was completely white now, and he moved a bit slower than he once had, but his pale blue eyes were still sharp, and his voice was still strong. 33 years ago, I married Grace Calloway in this very church, he began. I thought I knew what love was then. I thought I understood what it meant to build a life with someone, but I was wrong. I had no idea. These 33 years have taught me that love is not a destination you reach. It is a journey you take together. It is choosing each other every single day in good times and bad. It is building something together that is greater than either of you could create alone. He turned to look at Grace, who sat beside him with tears streaming down her face. Grace, you have been my partner, my love, my best friend. You have given me 3 incredible children and a family that fills my heart to bursting. You have stood beside me through droughts and disease, through loss and triumph. You have made every day of the last 33 years worth living. I love you more today than I did the day I married you, and I will love you more tomorrow than I do today. The crowd erupted in applause, and Grace stood to embrace her husband. They stood together, these two people who had found each other in the darkness all those years ago, who had chosen to walk into the light together and never looked back. That night, as they prepared for bed in the room they had shared for more than 3 decades, Grace thought about Ethan's words. He was right. Love was a journey, not a destination, and what a journey it had been. Ethan, she said softly as they settled under the covers. Do you remember what you said to me that first night, when you found me at your well, come back in daylight instead? Ethan replied immediately. How could I forget? Those were the words that started our whole story. They were more than that, Grace said. They were an invitation to step out of the darkness and into the light, an invitation to trust you, to let you help me, to take a chance on something new. You were offering me hope when I had none. Ethan pulled her close, her head resting on his chest where she could hear the steady beat of his heart. And you accepted the invitation. You came back in daylight. You let me into your life. That took courage, Grace. Desperation, more like, Grace said with a soft laugh. Courage, Ethan insisted. It takes courage to accept help when you need it. It takes courage to trust a stranger. It takes courage to let yourself hope again when hope has failed you before. They fell silent, both lost in their own thoughts. Outside, the Wyoming night was peaceful, with only the occasional sound of cattle lowing in the distance or a horse shifting in the barn. This land had been their home for so long, the place where they had built their life together. Grace thought about all the moments that had led them here. The first time Ethan had kissed her, their wedding day, the births of their children, the hard years and the good years, the laughter and the tears. Every moment had been precious, every memory a treasure. "I would do it all again," she whispered into the darkness. "Every single moment exactly the same way." "So would I," Ethan agreed, his arms tightening around her, 1,000 times over. They drifted off to sleep like that, wrapped in each other's arms, two people who had found their way to each other against all odds and built a love that would last a lifetime. The seasons continued their eternal cycle. Springs brought new calves and colts. Summers were filled with the hard work of running the ranch. Autumns brought the cattle drives to market. Winters were for rest and family, with multiple generations gathering around the big table in the Quinn ranch house for meals and celebrations. Grace and Ethan grew older together, their bodies showing the wear of years of hard work but their spirits still strong. They became the beloved patriarch and matriarch of not just their own family, but of the entire South Pass City community. People sought Ethan's advice on business matters and turned to Grace for wisdom on family concerns. In 1918, when Ethan was 64 and Grace was 62, they celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary. The celebration was more subdued than their 33rd had been, as the world was in the grip of the Great War and many young men from South Pass City were serving overseas. But their family gathered close, grateful to have each other in uncertain times. James was now 40, running the ranch with skill and dedication. His children were grown or nearly so, with his oldest son Ethan Jr. already taking on significant responsibilities. Margaret was a loving wife and mother, and had become like a daughter to Grace. Eleanor was 35, still living in South Pass City with Robert. They had 4 children who kept them busy, and Robert's law practice was thriving. Eleanor had become involved in the women's suffrage movement and regularly traveled to other towns to give speeches. Daniel had completed medical school and opened a practice in Cheyenne, where he specialized in surgery. He had married a nurse named Catherine, and they had 2 young children. Daniel tried to visit the ranch several times a year, and Ethan and Grace were always overjoyed to see him. Samuel was now 52, his hair almost completely white. Emily was still beautiful and still his devoted wife. Their children were all grown with families of their own, spreading across Wyoming and beyond. Samuel and Ethan still worked side by side most days, their bond as strong as it had been when Samuel was a 15-year-old boy and Ethan was a young rancher offering him hope. On the evening of their 40th anniversary, after all the family had gone home and the house was quiet, Ethan and Grace sat on their porch one more time. It had become their tradition, this quiet time together at the end of important days. 40 years, Grace marveled. "It feels like yesterday and like forever, all at the same time." "I know what you mean," Ethan replied. "I can still see you standing by my well in the dark, trying so hard to be brave. But I can also barely remember what my life was like before you were in it." Grace leaned her head on his shoulder. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, just enjoying being together. Finally, Grace spoke again. "We have been very blessed, you know. A good life, healthy children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. Not everyone gets this much happiness." "I know," Ethan said softly. "I never take it for granted. Not for one single day." "Promise me something," Grace said suddenly, sitting up to look at him. "Anything. Promise me that when I am gone, you will not retreat from life. That you will stay close to the children and grandchildren. That you will keep living fully until the very end." Ethan's expression turned fierce. "You are not going anywhere for a very long time, Grace Quinn. We do not know that. We are both getting older. I just need to know that you will be all right." Ethan took both her hands in his. "I will never be all right without you, but I promise that I will honor your memory by continuing to love our family and live the life we built together. But only if you promise me the same thing." "I promise," Grace said, tears slipping down her cheeks. They held each other as the stars came out, two people facing the inevitable truth that their time together was finite. But they had made the most of every moment, building a legacy of love that would endure long after they were gone. As it happened, Grace and Ethan would have many more years together. They lived to see the end of the Great War and the beginning of a new decade. They watched their grandchildren grow and marry and start families of their own. They saw the world change in ways they never could have imagined, with automobiles replacing horses and electricity coming to even remote ranches. Through it all, they remained devoted to each other. Every morning, Ethan would wake Grace with a kiss. Every evening, they would sit together on their porch and talk about their day. Every night, they would fall asleep in each other's arms. In 1925, when they celebrated their 47th wedding anniversary, the family threw another big party. Ethan was now 71, and Grace was 69. They moved more slowly than they once had, and their hearing was not what it used to be. But their minds were still sharp, and their love for each other was undimmed. At the party, surrounded by their children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, Ethan stood to make a toast. His voice was not as strong as it once was, but it still carried authority and warmth. 47 years ago, I found a beautiful young woman sneaking around my well in the dark, he began, and the family laughed because they had all heard this story many times. I could have shot her. I could have run her off my property. Instead, I told her to come back in daylight instead. Best decision I ever made. He turned to Grace, who sat beside him holding his hand. "Grace, you are the light of my life. You have been my partner, my love, my everything for nearly 5 decades. Every moment with you has been a gift. I love you more than words can express." Grace stood and kissed him, not caring that everyone was watching. "I love you too, Ethan. You saved my life in more ways than one. You showed me what it means to be truly loved and cherished. Thank you for 47 beautiful years." The family raised their glasses in a toast, celebrating a love that had stood the test of time. That night, as had become their custom, Ethan and Grace sat on their porch together. They could hear the sounds of their family settling in for the night in various rooms throughout the house. The ranch spread out before them in the darkness, peaceful and prosperous. "Are you happy, Grace?" Ethan asked softly. Grace thought about the question. Was she happy? She was old and tired, her body aching from decades of hard work. Many of her friends were gone, taken by age and illness. The world was changing so fast that she sometimes barely recognized it, but she was surrounded by family who loved her. She lived in a home built with love and hard work. She had spent nearly 50 years married to a man who treated her like she was the most precious thing in the world. She had raised 3 wonderful children and watched them raise wonderful children of their own. "Yes," she said finally, "I am happy, so very happy." Ethan squeezed her hand. "So am I. Thank you for saying yes all those years ago. Thank you for marrying me and building this life with me." "Thank you for telling me to come back in daylight," Grace replied. "Thank you for seeing past my desperation to the person I could become. Thank you for loving me." They sat together as the night deepened, two people who had found each other in darkness and spent a lifetime walking in the light together. They had faced every challenge side by side, celebrated every triumph together. They had built a family, a legacy, a love that would endure. As the years wore on, age began to take its inevitable toll. Ethan developed a weak heart and had to stop doing the heavy ranch work he had always loved. Grace's joints ached with arthritis, and she could no longer work in her garden the way she used to. But they adapted, finding new ways to be useful and productive. Ethan spent his days in his office, managing the ranch's business affairs and advising James on major decisions. Grace continued her charitable work, though now she directed others rather than doing the physical labor herself. They still had their evenings together on the porch, still fell asleep in each other's arms every night. In the spring of 1929, Ethan fell seriously ill with pneumonia. The doctor was called and did what he could, but at 75 years old, Ethan's body struggled to fight off the infection. For days, he drifted in and out of consciousness while Grace sat by his bedside, holding his hand and praying. On the fourth day, Ethan's eyes opened and he looked at Grace with perfect clarity. She leaned close, tears streaming down her face. "Do not leave me," she whispered. "Please, Ethan. Do not leave me." Ethan reached up with a trembling hand and wiped away her tears. "I am not afraid," he said softly. "How could I be afraid when I have lived such a beautiful life? When I have been loved by you, I am afraid," Grace admitted. "I do not know how to be without you." "You are the strongest person I know," Ethan replied. "You will be all right. You have our family to love and care for. Promise me you will keep living, Grace. Keep loving them. Keep being the light that you have always been." "I promise," Grace sobbed, "but I do not want to do it without you." "You will never be without me," Ethan said, his voice growing weaker. "I will always be with you. In the children's faces, in the ranch we built together, in every sunset you watch from our porch, I will always be there." He took a labored breath and Grace could see him struggling. "I love you," he whispered. "From that first night when I found you at my well, I loved you. Thank you for coming back in daylight. Thank you for choosing me." "I love you too," Grace said, leaning down to kiss him. "Always and forever." Ethan's eyes closed and a peaceful expression settled over his face. Grace held his hand as his breathing gradually slowed and then stopped. Her beloved husband, her partner for nearly 51 years, was gone. The funeral was attended by hundreds of people. Ethan Quinn had touched many lives during his 75 years, and the church was packed with family, friends, ranch hands, and community members who had come to pay their respects. Grace sat in the front pew surrounded by her children and grandchildren, drawing strength from their presence. At the graveside, as they lowered Ethan's coffin into the ground, Grace placed a single rose on top. "Until we meet again, my love," she whispered. The days after Ethan's death were the hardest of Grace's life. The house felt empty without him, even though it was still filled with family. She would wake in the morning and reach for him, only to remember that he was gone. She would think of something she wanted to tell him, then realize he was not there to listen. But she had made him a promise, and Grace Calloway Quinn kept her promises. She continued living, continued engaging with her family and community. The pain of loss never completely went away, but it gradually became something she could carry. She lived for 3 more years, years filled with love from her family. She got to see 2 more great-grandchildren born. She watched as James took the Quinn Ranch to new heights of success. She saw Eleanor's youngest daughter graduate from college, the first woman in the family to do so. She celebrated Samuel's 65th birthday and Emily's continued good health. In the summer of 1932, Grace fell ill with a fever. At 76 years old, her body had little strength left to fight. Daniel came home from Cheyenne to care for her, but even his skilled medical attention could not reverse the inevitable. On a warm August evening, as the sun was setting and painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and gold, Grace asked to be moved to the porch. Her children and grandchildren gathered around her, knowing the end was near. Grace looked out at the land she and Ethan had worked so hard to tame, at the ranch that had been their life's work. She could almost see him standing by the well, tall and strong like he had been that first night. She could almost hear his voice telling her to come back in daylight instead. "I am coming back," she whispered. "I am ready to come back to you, my love." Eleanor leaned close. "What did you say, Mama?" Grace looked at her beautiful daughter, at James standing strong and protective, at Daniel holding her hand with such gentleness. She looked at all the grandchildren and great-grandchildren who had come from the love she and Ethan had shared. "I am so proud of all of you," she said, her voice weak but clear. "Your father and I built something beautiful together, but you are our greatest achievement. Love each other. Take care of each other. That is all that really matters in the end." As the sun dipped below the horizon, Grace closed her eyes and let out a peaceful sigh. She was gone, reunited at last with her beloved Ethan. They buried Grace next to Ethan in the South Pass City Cemetery, under a large cottonwood tree that provided shade in summer. The headstone was simple. Ethan Thomas Quinn, 1854–1929, Grace Calloway Quinn, 1856–1932, together in life. Together in eternity, the Quinn Ranch continued for generations, passed down through the family. The story of how Ethan and Grace met became family legend, told and retold at gatherings. The well where they first encountered each other still stands, protected now as a family monument. Their love story became part of the fabric of South Pass City, a reminder that sometimes the darkest moments can lead to the greatest blessings. That an act of kindness, a simple invitation to come back in daylight instead, can change the course of lives. Grace Calloway had gone to Ethan Quinn's well in darkness, desperate and afraid, stealing water to save her brother. Ethan Quinn had found her there, and instead of anger had offered compassion, telling her to come back in daylight instead. She had accepted his invitation, stepping out of the darkness and into the light. And in that light, they had found each other. They had built a life together filled with love, family, hardship, and triumph. They had raised children who raised children of their own, creating a legacy that would endure. They had shown an entire community what it meant to love deeply and live fully. Their story began at a well in the dark, with a desperate woman and a compassionate man. It ended decades later with 2 lives well lived and a love that had stood the test of time. In between was everything that makes life worth living: laughter and tears, struggle and success, heartbreak and hope. But most of all, there was love. Constant, enduring, transformative love. The kind of love that begins with a simple act of kindness and grows into something that outlasts even death itself. Come back in daylight instead. 5 simple words that changed 2 lives forever and created a love story for the ages. 5 words that proved sometimes the most beautiful things in life come from the darkest moments, if only we are brave enough to step into the light. And Grace and Ethan had been brave. They had stepped into the light together and never looked back, building a love that would be remembered and celebrated for generations to come.